You have been sick before. Fever, chills, body aches, the feeling that even breathing requires effort. And you had medicine, a pharmacist, a hospital within driving distance, a thermometer to tell you how bad it was, a phone to call someone if it got worse. Ancient humans had none of that, not any of it. And yet they survived illnesses for hundreds of thousands of years before any of those things existed. How? The answer is not what most people assume. It is not that ancient humans were tough. It is not that their bodies were somehow stronger than ours. It's that sickness, infection, and injury have been killing humans for so long that the survivors carried something extraordinary, accumulated biological and behavioral knowledge that modern medicine is only now beginning to fully understand. Let us start with fever. When you develop a fever, most people today treat it as the problem, something to be reduced as quickly as possible. Humans could not reduce a fever. They had no aspirin, no ice bath protocol. And here is what modern immunology has confirmed. That may not have always been a disadvantage. Fever is not the infection. Fever is the body's deliberate response to infection. Core body temperature rises because most bacterial pathogens reproduce less efficiently at high temperature. The fever is not a malfunction. It is a weapon. A fever of 38 to 39 degrees creates an internal environment that actively slows the spread of many common bacterial infections. The ancient human who could not reduce their fever simply allowed the weapon to work. Modern research is actively reconsidering how aggressively fever should be reduced in otherwise healthy individuals. Because in many cases, reducing it quickly may be interrupting a defense mechanism that the body deployed for a reason. But fever alone was never the full story. Because ancient humans also discovered, through thousands of years of observation, that certain plants did something remarkable. They changed how sick people felt. Is one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the history of medicine. A 5,000-year-old body, preserved in alpine ice, found in the Alps in 1991. And what researchers found on him changed how scientists think about prehistoric medicine entirely. Was carrying birch polypore mushrooms, not as food. Birch polypore has almost no nutritional value, but it has documented antiparasitic properties. Analysis of Freese's intestines revealed he was infected with intestinal parasites. He was carrying his medicine with him. A year-old person had identified a specific natural substance to treat a specific medical condition. Not randomly, not superstitiously, through direct observation of what worked. And Ötzi was not unusual. He was a record of a practice that was likely already ancient by his time. Researchers studying Neanderthal dental calculus, the hardened plaque preserved on ancient teeth, found something remarkable. Chemical signatures of specific plants in the calculus of a Neanderthal individual who showed bone evidence of a painful dental abscess. One of those plants was another was contained as the natural precursor to salicylic acid. Salicylic acid is the active compound in aspirin. A Neanderthal with a tooth infection was self-medicating with the chemical ancestor of the most widely used painkiller in human history. Not by accident, by finding something that reduced pain and using it. The pharmaceutical industry did not discover pain relief. It purified and concentrated what ancient humans had been using for tens of thousands of years. But medicine was not the only strategy. Because one of the most powerful tools ancient humans had against infectious disease was something they did not even know they were doing. Behavior change. When someone in a prehistoric group became seriously ill, the group's behavior around them changed automatically. Not because of germ theory, not because of any understanding of transmission, but because disgust is one of the oldest immune responses in the human behavioral repertoire. The sight, smell, and sound of serious illness triggers a visceral avoidance response in most healthy humans. This response evolved precisely to reduce contact with potentially infectious individuals. Ancient humans who instinctively distanced themselves from the seriously ill were less likely to become infected. Of generations, that instinct became deeply embedded. The social isolation that modern medicine formally calls quarantine was being practiced long before anyone had a word for it, not as a policy decision, as an automatic biological response. There is also the question of what happened when someone was injured rather than ill. Deep cut, the ancient world was not a minor inconvenience. It was a potential death sentence. Antibiotics, any wound that became infected could kill within days. And yet archaeological evidence consistently shows ancient humans who survived injuries that should have been fatal. Shanidar, Neanderthal, who lived 4 years with a missing arm and severe physical disability. Ancient skulls showing healed trepidation, deliberately drilled holes with evidence of extended survival afterward. Injuries that would have required sustained care, wound management, and some form of infection control to survive. Because ancient humans made an observation that saved lives. Some substances stopped wounds from festering. Honey was one of them. Honey has been used as a wound dressing in multiple ancient cultures across different continents. Not because ancient people understood hydrogen, peroxide, or osmotic pressure, but because they observed that wounds covered in honey healed better than wounds left open. Modern research has confirmed that honey is a genuinely effective antimicrobial agent. Its low water content creates an osmotic environment hostile to bacteria. It produces small amounts of hydrogen peroxide. Its high sugar concentration inhibits microbial growth. Ancient humans discovered this empirically, thousands of years before the chemistry was understood. Other substances were used in similar ways. Clay applied to wounds. Certain tree resins with documented antibacterial properties. Specific plant poultices that researchers have since identified as containing bioactive compounds. In every case, the discovery preceded the understanding by thousands of years. The observation came first. The explanation came later. This is important to understand because it changes how we think about ancient medicine. It was not primitive guessing. It was empirical science operating without a formal framework. Observation, testing, retention of what worked, discarding of what did not. The same process, slower and unrecorded, that underlies all scientific medicine. But there is another dimension to ancient illness that modern people rarely consider. The psychological one. There is now substantial evidence that social support has measurable biological effects on recovery from illness. Patients who feel socially supported recover faster from infection than patients who feel isolated. The mechanisms are not fully understood, but the effect is documented. Ancient humans rarely faced illness alone. They were embedded in small, tight communities where illness in one member triggered active care from others. Not out of altruism alone, but because a group that lost members to preventable illness was a weaker group. The care of sick individuals was not a luxury. It was a survival investment. The person nursed back to health was the hunter who would feed the group next season, the knowledge holder who remembered where the water source was during the last drought, the grandmother who was keeping 3 children alive. Losing them was a cost the group could not always afford, and so they were cared for with whatever the group had available, which, it turns out, was more than nothing. It was observation accumulated over generations. That work, behaviors that helped, substances that protected wounds, the knowledge that fever should sometimes be allowed to run, instinct to separate the seriously ill, understanding that rest, warmth, and community were not optional comfort. They were medical interventions. When you are next, lying in bed sick, waiting for medicine to work, surrounded by people who want you to recover, you are experiencing something ancient humans built and maintained for hundreds of thousands of years. Not because they understood it, because they had learned, through the hardest possible teacher, what worked. Drop comment and tell me which part of this surprised you the most. and make sure you are subscribed, because next time we are going somewhere even stranger than this.